Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about your last short paper. So after this we're going to move on to research, but we still have this one last type of writing that we need to do. And this is called definition. So I thought it was appropriate to give you the definition of definition. So it is exploring a subject, so once you have a topic, by either applying personal interpretation of a word, proposing a revision of a commonly accepted meaning of the word, or to analyze what the word represents if it's a complex or controversial idea. Okay, so it's taking an idea, a word that's very abstract, and making it much more specific by giving it definitions. But we don't want dictionary definitions. So what I'm looking for here is that you break down this, whatever topic you choose, and make it much more specific, but you do that by either applying a personal interpretation of the word, so maybe use narrative or compare contrast or something like that, revising the way we currently use the word, so this is more of a proposal idea that we should change the way we use a specific term, or to really break down what that word means if it's very complex or controversial. Now, here's something you need to know about definition. Definition in and of itself is not a way to organize a paper. So unlike compare contrast, where you knew you needed to compare and then you needed to contrast, or cause effect, where you knew you needed to list, 3 different causes or 3 different effects, or example, where you give your 3 examples. Unlike those types of writing, definition can be done just about any way, which is why I save it for last. Because what I want you to do with definition is choose one of the other modes that we have done so far. So that's description, example, cause, effect, compare, contrast, process. Any of those types we've covered so far, you will write your definition paper in that style. So you can define by doing cause, effect. You can define by doing compare, contrast. Okay, so you're going to choose one of the modes we've covered already to define. Now, what mode is most common here? That would be the example/illustration paper, where you give 3 examples or 3 reasons. That's the most common method that students use to write the definition paper. Okay, so another way to look at definition is you explain what something is and what something is not by identifying the class the term belongs to and how this word is different from other ideas. So what are the specific characteristics of this word that set it apart from other words? So that would be much more like compare contrast, where you say this word means this, here's what it doesn't mean, or here's why it's not the same as this other word. Maybe we get these 2 words mixed up, they're not exactly the same thing, here's how they're really different from each other. We talked about this at the beginning of the semester when we talked about the difference between revising and editing. A lot of times we use those words together, but they're actually separate ideas. And so I would, choose one of them. Maybe I want to talk about editing and say, this is what editing is, this is what it's not, and here's how editing is different from revising. Okay, so there are a couple of different ways you can go about doing this definition paper. If you want to see the second option, that is on page 450 in your textbook. Now, why in the world do we write definition? Well, the point of definition in academic settings is so you can show that you understand complex ideas. So a lot of times these will be terms that you're being asked to define in a class, and a lot of times these are terms that are really important to the understanding of that particular class. You see this a lot in science. So they introduce some really complex idea, and then you're asked to write about it because they want to make sure that you understand and can break down these really complex ideas. Okay? We do this in literature also. I introduced the idea of in medias res. And maybe some of you have heard of it. It means that we start in the middle. And so when we talk about the Odyssey, I want to see that they understand the idea of in medias res and how that applies to the story that we're currently reading. So in academics, we use this when we're wanting to make sure our students understand really complex ideas. Okay, so that's what you're going to do. You're going to take some really abstract, complex, intellectual idea and break it down into, easy to understand ways to define that idea. All right, so under writing tips, again, you can use description, example, cause, effect, compare, contrast, any of those work. Maybe think about what is it I'm qualified to define. So what knowledge do you have of a really difficult abstract concept? Now let me say this. Your topic needs to be a concept, a type of person, a type of place, a type of event, a controversial idea. What I don't want your topic to be is something tangible. So I don't want you to be able to touch it. These need to be abstract ideas. So don't tell me, don't write about baseball. Write about teamwork. Don't write about dogs. Write about loyalty. Okay, so make sure that this concept is something much more abstract and not terrifically specific to one thing. Okay. You want to make sure you keep a consistent tone about your subject. So here's the way you go about starting this. Really, this paper is a what is blank, and you fill in the blank. So what is courage? What is loyalty? What is, whatever you want to put in there. Then your paper is the answer to this question. By the way, your thesis is the answer to this question. Okay? So if I put, what is education? That's a pretty abstract idea, and I can't write very well on this thing. Then my thesis is the answer to that question. Education is, and so on and so on. So it'll be pretty, well laid out in your thesis that this is how you're going to define it. By the way, your thesis should reflect the type of rhetorical mode that you're going to be using. So if you do compare-contrast, your thesis needs to sound like compare-contrast. Okay? If you're going to use example, your thesis needs to sound like example. So make sure your thesis matches the mode that you're doing and shows us how you're going to define the term. All right? And then in the body, you're going to then use that particular mode to break down this really abstract idea. So what is education? I can say it's critical thinking, it's opening up a new world of ideas, it's giving practical skills for success in life. Maybe those are the 3 ways I want to define it. So that would be example, all right, because I'm giving you 3 reasons. And so that's my paper, all right? All right, I got that. So whenever you're planning this out and you're thinking of your 3 body paragraphs, make sure you can keep a consistent tone about your subject. The most popular definition topic is what is love? Okay, it's also a great song, but what is love is really popular as a topic. Now, there are a lot of ways you can go about that, but you need to make sure that your tone stays consistent. Remember, we talked about voice and tone, way back at the beginning, but you want to make sure that your tone stays the same. So if you're going to go with, love is wonderful and warm and squishy and lovely, then that needs to be the tone that you keep about love all the way through your paper. If I'm going to go the total opposite direction and say love is stupid and love hurts and, love makes people make stupid decisions, don't word it that way, but you can go a whole different tone. But what you don't want to do is mix the 2. You don't want to talk about love is a great thing and love is a bad thing all in the same paper. Okay, so choose a consistent tone. That's really key to making this paper stay cohesive. So be thinking about that with your body paragraphs. Then you're going to want to brainstorm different ways to explain your topic. So how are you going to break down these really abstract topics? Again, that's up to you. The one thing I do not want you to do in this paper, though, is give me Merriam-Webster, dictionary.com definitions. Those are really boring. They don't apply to real life. I don't want those. That's not what I'm looking for here. I want your definition, not what Merriam-Webster has to say. Now, that being said, if you want to propose a revision of a meaning of a word in the introduction, you could give us the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition only because you're going to do, some kind of compare-contrast style, showing why there are better or different definitions maybe that we should use. All right, so it is okay in the introduction if you want to give us that, only because it fits the style of writing that you're doing in the paper. Okay? Let's see, that didn't work very well, huh? Okay, so your thesis needs to show a pattern of development you'll use. Also, what are you defining? And then don't forget your so what. What do we learn when we break this down? There's a discussion of thesis statements for this type of paper on page 457, so make sure you take a look at this. Your textbook can be very helpful for this paper. When you refer to words as the word, so when you're using the word and discussing the word itself, you need to use italics. Please see page 461 for how to do that so you know that you do it correctly. Also, how do you talk about a definition? How do you do that correctly? Again, see page 461. So make sure you're taking a look at these pages and these recommendations that I'm giving to you. I'm doing that for a reason, so make sure you do it. Also, there's a really great example of definition called the celebrity chef on page 464, so take a look at that. I've given you some topic ideas. What does the pursuit of happiness mean? Then how do we see this in life? Okay. What does define the term faith? Explain the process of finding or losing faith. So this could be a process paper, or describe people who exude faith, or what are 3 ways you could define faith. So there are a lot of different ways you can go about organizing these types. Gender terms, or really popular culture terms of any kind, are great. So chick, man, stud, those are some common gender terms. But we can use lots of other slang terms. One of my very favorite definition papers I had a student do was over what is swag. And so, popular culture terms are really great because the meanings are really abstract. All right, politics and government, of course, are full of these really great abstract ideas. Freedom, American, the American way, patriotism, liberal, conservative, so on. All of these are really great abstract ideas that you could consider. Finally, think of words you know from another language, maybe what happens in translation, or how do they change in meaning as we go from one language to another. So what we're doing is looking at abstract concepts and looking at what are their true meanings and breaking down that word into something that's much more specific and relevant to real life. Okay? So here's what you're going to do for brainstorming. I want you to create just a basic outline of your paper. So, up at the top, write what is, and then fill in the blank here. Okay? Decide on what pattern of development you're going to use, so make sure you write that down so you're clear about that. And then maybe you want to do, a basic web after that to plan out what you're going to discuss with your paper. Also, don't forget a so what, and by the way, this is the definition of this term is not a so what. What do we learn when we break down these really complex terms? What are we supposed to learn from this? Okay, so don't forget your so what, and it's not this is my definition. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Otherwise, happy writing.